Good morning. It is December 31st, New Year's Eve, 2014. This is Can We Talk, and Robin Hensel and Theresa Skorseth are here to tell you what's what, to give you the news and views from the left. I'm going to start with a piece, just a quick little piece on cognitive dissonance. And this is from Wikipedia. I'm just going to read a paragraph or two to you. In psychology, cognitive dissonance is the mental stress or discomfort experienced by an individual who holds two or more contradictory beliefs or ideas or values at the same time, or who is confronted by new information that conflicts with beliefs, ideas, and values that they already hold. Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance focuses on how humans strive for internal consistency. When inconsistency, also known as dissonance, is experienced, individuals tend to become psychologically uncomfortable, and they are motivated to attempt to reduce this dissonance, as well as to actively avoid situations and information which are likely to increase it. So you end up having to fudge around in your own ethical system, trying to figure out a way to hold two, if not opposite, at least mutually exclusive ideas in your head at the same time, and be loyal to both of those ideas. Or you end up avoiding any kind of information that you know is going to jar your current perceptions. So there are people who don't watch the news because they don't want to know what's going on. They would have to think deeply about beliefs they prefer to hold if it turned out that those beliefs were not serving them or serving the best interests of people.
Yeah, and I think our country, as well as our community, is really divided at this time. But Ferguson and what happened in New York to Eric Garner, clearly we have citizens who are, and even in Minneapolis, the Bloomington Black Lives Matter event that was just held recently, and now the three organizers of that event are likely going to be charged by the Bloomington City Attorney, the new Bloomington City Attorney, with potentially organizing a riot,
Yes,
and stifling the monetary flow at the Mall of America. But, you know, we definitely have a country that's divided. We've got one group in our society, like you and I, that are all for inclusion and human rights and civil rights and transparency and justice and all those things, peace and so on. And then we have others who believe that we should just continue along the pathway that we are, even though we can't afford that route.
Well, except that they don't see it that way. That's the whole point of cognitive dissonance.
Right.
If you believe that it's okay to keep some people down for the economic benefit or social benefit of another group, you find a way to make that seem like an ethical stand rather than just a commercial or material or practical stand.
Right.
And we all do this to some degree.
Right.
It's part of the human condition. And as I was saying to Robin earlier, the more leisure time you have and the less your lives are bound up in the worries of mere survival, the more cognitive dissonance you're going to have, because the more opportunities you'll have to think about things or hear about things that you would rather not know.
Right. I'm just going to read a little bit, because this really pertains to what we're talking about here. And this is from Common Sense. It's called Blowback in Ferguson. Historians and political scientists have warned about dangerous war fever sweeping the United States, America's entanglements overseas, its imperial ambitions, and the more recent global war on terror, a war indefinite duration against an ill-defined shifting enemy with no specific definition of victory, poses a grave danger for the very character of American government and society, unraveling the fabric of the Constitution. The framers of the Constitution recognized such dangers when they carefully subordinated the military to civilian authority and attempted to limit the power of the president to initiate war. Gregory Foster, a former Army officer and West Point graduate, who now teaches national security studies at the National Defense University in Washington, said that the principle of civilian control of the military, an early building block of American democracy, has been reversed and become the civilian subjugation to the military. And I'll let you continue on with the highlighted things there. I kind of have a cold, so hard for me to read right now.
Aside from constant surveillance and the notorious kill list, war has been internalized, and the militarization of the police force has put every American in danger. The biggest threat to Americans now comes from those who are paid to protect them, a threat which has been building for decades. The Troops to Cops program offered grants to police departments who hired soldiers returning from battle, contributing even further to the militarization of the police force, because of course, you know, your organization takes on the personality of the people involved. Although the role of the police is to protect and to serve, they're being taught to kill. And I've always said, if you give a boy a toy, he'll play with it. If you give a man a gun, he'll shoot somebody. Mayor Michael Bloomberg and New York City Police Commissioner Raymond Kell, who proudly brag of having my own army in the NYPD, that was a quote, and who used that army to spy on peaceful Occupy Wall Street protesters. Was that a whole sentence?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not entirely sure. Okay. So why has the media been silent? Why has the media been silent on the militarization of police up to this point? Well, they are the watchdogs of acceptable ideological messages, responsible for manufacturing consent. Wow, what a concept. Their goal is to control the news and information available to society by using censorship and propaganda. Big media is not designed to serve the welfare of the public. We've always depended on the press to keep us citizens informed of what's going on. So it's disturbing to think that they're in on the problem. The internet has made it virtually impossible to hide facts, so that would be our new watchdog. And quite possibly mainstream media has decided to do some damage control and take over the reins in order to control the flow of information. Regardless of what big media wants us to believe, what we witness is a blowback.
Well, okay, and so that's adding to, you know, our country's divided. And I just want the public to see this. It says, if you really supported the troops, you wouldn't send them to fight meaningless wars based on lies. Because what we know, including and since the Vietnam War, is that our government doesn't tell us the truth until long afterwards. Now, we knew, the ones of us who did the homework and the research, and were out on the streets protesting the illegal invasion of Iraq. Most of us that were paying any attention to what was really going on sensed that something was wrong with that. And now we know it was an illegal invasion. We had no right to invade Iraq. And think about, during the Vietnam War, reporters weren't embedded with the troops then. They were there to report what was really going on. They didn't have to worry if they said too much or reported the facts of what was really going on. That has really changed. And so what we're getting from the media isn't truly factual. We're only getting a little tiny taste of what's really happening out there. And to bring that local, I've sat in on meetings where the city administrator or the city attorney, this is in my notes from the meetings from the beginning in 2012 that I attended, where in one particular incident, at least the city attorney looks right at the Morrison County Record Reporter, Terry Lurkey, which is our city official newspaper, and says, oh, and by the way, Terry, you don't have to include that in your piece.
That's off the record.
Awesome.
As if anything given in a public meeting could be off the record.
And that's not ethical, for one thing. It may not even be legal.
No, it probably isn't.
So I want people to know that it's your right to film cops wherever in public. And I'll read this. It just says, know your rights. It's perfectly legal to film cops at work in all 50 states. Recording cops openly in a public place, as long as it doesn't physically interfere with their ability to do their job, is your constitutional right. And this is important because there was a case here in Minnesota. Andrew J. Henderson, people can research him online if you want. He's become a friend of mine. He was represented by my criminal attorney, Kevin Rich, and he was filming an event that was happening with a man who was intoxicated at his apartment complex. And the Ramsey County deputy, a female, took his camera, said he couldn't film, and he was completely vindicated by a jury because Yeah, it is your legal right to film, and he was, but the deputy that took his camera also conveniently lost the SD card.
Oh, what a shame.
So the proof was gone, but he was well within beyond 35 feet. And
This is when we need to keep ourselves educated about what we can and cannot legally do.
right,
And for that matter, I actually consider it almost a duty. If you have a camera and you see something going down, to film it. It may be that what happens is something that is perfectly appropriate, that the police behave properly and so on. But in case it isn't, now there's a record of that.
right. And then, you know, my filming of different meetings and different things I've been at, I think has made a lot of people uncomfortable, and I sort of question, why would anybody be uncomfortable unless they had something to hide, unless they were doing something wrong?
Yes, it's not as if you were peeping through the window blinds, you know, you were, it was a public meeting in many cases, a public meeting where everything that was said was supposed to be for public consumption. The public was invited to attend and see and hear.
Well, another thing, I don't always remember 100% of everything that was said. I take notes and so on, but it's just not the same as making a recording. And if I have an audio or video recording, I can always go back and get it exactly right. Exactly what was said. So I'm quoting people right. I remember what I said or what they said, or, you know. So
And there have been times when people have said, I never said that.
Exactly.
And you were able to say, oh yes you did.
Oh,
and
yes,
got
you
it
did.
on tape.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So it's important.
Now, one of my attorneys, Bruce Fine, who I in many ways align with, he's definitely an advocate of peace. And he believes that our government is spending way too much on the endless military machine, the empire. So I'm just going to read a couple things that I think are important that he wrote. He told me a long time ago that anything he's ever said, I can quote him or I can take that piece and use it however I want. Because he just wants his message to get out. And I have no objection to people taking something that I've said and using it as well, because then the message goes further. So this is on his blog, and I didn't even know about his blog until recently. But this piece is called Inventing Threats, Protecting Defense Budgets. Department of Defense continually invents national security threats to protect its budget. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So what explains the huge discrepancy between the defense budget and genuine national security threats? Invented dangers. Then Senator and later Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel echoed in 2007, people say we're not fighting a war for oil. Of course we are. Former Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan confirmed in his memoir, I'm saddened that it is politically inconvenient to acknowledge what everyone knows, the Iraq War is largely about oil. That's Alan Greenspan said that, folks.
Yeah.
But access to oil has never been a national security threat. Even arch-enemy Hugo Chavez was eager to sell us every drop of oil in Venezuela. And if he wasn't eager to sell, bribery would work on his subordinates at much less cost than projected military force. And if bribery didn't work, we could have purchased oil through middlemen or straw buyers at far less cost than war. The access of evil threatens the liberties of the United States from within. The warfare state, the surveillance state, the bailout state, and the welfare state. War makes legal what is customarily first-degree murder. It subordinates transparency to secrecy, and due process, privacy, free speech, and the separation of powers bow to the shouts of national security. The surveillance state is a first cousin to the warfare state. Willing to crush liberty in hopes of diminishing risk, it exposes all citizens to surveillance on the hunch that some may be connected to international terrorism. Unlike the FBI's 10 most wanted list, a secret terrorist watch list has been created without due process safeguards for listing or delisting. Now, switch gears here for a minute.
Sure.
I found this online, it's really interesting. This is called the March Forward. The Veterans and Service Members Stand Up Against War and Racism. It's called the 10-Point Program. We demand the right to refuse illegal and immoral orders. We demand an immediate end to the criminal occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan. We demand an end to the existing officer corps. We demand adequate funding for the Department of Military Veterans Affairs. We demand the right to a job, housing, health care, and education for all. We demand the immediate end to all military aid to governments in service of United States imperialism. We demand that all those involved in pursuing war for profit be indicted. 10. We demand full reparations paid with interest to all victims of the United States military.
Oh, good luck with that one, but yeah.
Now, if we have enough time at the end, I'd like to have you go through and read everything in between my highlighted parts of this, because this is good stuff.
Yeah. Very interesting. The existing officer corps.
Well, Veterans for Peace members are former military members, and they've been banding together for a long time, because when you're in the military, you can't speak out like you should be able to about something that you think is unjust or wrong, or you're asked to do something in service of your country that's immoral, that your conscience will not allow you to do.
Creates cognitive dissonance.
There you go.
So, this is very interesting.
Yeah.
What else have we got?
Now, well, let's switch for a minute and talk about signs, because over the holidays, some interesting stuff came up. And there was a news article on KSTP. Randall Burkness from out by the Covenant Church here in town was upset because he couldn't have his Christmas display and all the signs associated with it.
You got a letter from the city, am I right?
Yes, he did, a warning letter. And, everybody, 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago, when the new sign ordinance was passed, everyone got a flyer with their water bill explaining what you could and couldn't have in a residential area, the limits of the sign ordinance on private property. And so there really isn't any excuse for anybody to not know. And if they didn't get that, or they've forgotten, they can call City Hall, or they can access the sign ordinance on the city website so they know how it's limited. And
Or when they first get a warning letter from the city, they can immediately move to comply with those rules, because it's laid out in the letter that says, here's what you're doing wrong, here's what you need to fix.
right, I had a friend call me last night and tell me that a bunch in the city are upset with me again because of the sign ordinance and the whole Christmas decoration thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, folks, I didn't create the sign ordinance. The original sign ordinance was devised way back in the, 50s or 60s, and then it was tightened up a little bit in 1974. And garage sale signs and off-premise signs have never been legal here. But here's the problem, folks. Your council and your city staff and your city attorneys have never stuck by the ordinance. They've made exception after exception after exception. I'm working on a project. I'm going to finish this sometime over the winter. I'm digging into all the back research on this and finding out, oops, there went my microphone again, finding out that really there have been so many exceptions made that I think it's an exception when a business doesn't get an exception.
Yeah, it
Okay,
is.
I'll tell you something I found online just last night. This is mind-boggling. All the way back to 2006, okay? This is from the Morrison County Record News Archives, and it's reported by Liz Verley. And it's August 11th, 2006. And this is different activity of the City Council. Calling for a joint public hearing with the Planning Commission Monday, August 28th at 6:30 to consider conditional use permit requested by Scenic Signs on behalf of Coburn's Incorporated to allow signage larger than allowed.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
And the thing is, this used to be just okayed, just rubber stamped.
right, and now I don't know, I haven't had time, since I just found this last night, I haven't actually gone and looked in the folder for Coburn's, but I will inspect their file and find out. I'm guessing, if I check the minutes of this meeting, that this was approved. Now, if our city and our city officials or our business owners or anybody else wants more signage, then construct the sign ordinance to allow for unlimited or not have a sign ordinance.
Robin and I have said from the beginning, we don't think there should be a sign ordinance at all.
Well, not only us. Chris Grams at the radio station told them that back around this time when they were doing all this revising of the sign ordinance, she stated at a public meeting that she didn't think we should have a sign ordinance. Gee, I wonder why not.
There are a lot of cities all across the country. Bloomington has always been a good example where there's no sign ordinance and there's no problem.
Well, there is a sign ordinance, but it allows off-premise signs.
Oh, okay.
Yes, they do have a sign ordinance, but you can have several times a year and with limits on it, and with the permission of the landowner and the other property owner, you can have your garage sale sign or your church supper sign or your art event sign or whatever it is with the permission on someone else's property. It's perfectly legal. Now, Bloomington has some of the highest property values in this state. And for 30 years, they've had this ordinance that allows off-premise signs without any ramifications whatsoever.
Which is a perfect argument against the proposition from the city that having signs in your yard is going to devalue the property of the entire neighborhood, if not the city. So,
Right.
so as I said, we've always held that there shouldn't be a sign ordinance, or that it should be very liberal if there is one. It's the city. So it's the city, folks.
So what I found out, besides these two things, is that there are countless examples of how the Historic Preservation Commission and their members bent the rules, broke the rules, allowed overages with Chamber of Commerce sign at the depot. They made an exception for that. There was an exception made for a sign at Maple Island Park, I believe. There was another exception made for the movie theater signs. There were signs that were made exceptions for at the Falls Bar. The Support the Troops banner. Okay, now I'm questioning this lately, that I didn't know until recently. The Support the Troops banner is 42 square feet. Okay, that exceeds the legal limited amount for an event sign in this city. In the sign ordinance, it says that by permission with the council's approval, the city can have event signs no larger than 32 square feet. So how is it that they were able to re-erect a banner that exceeds that? And it's hanging today in Bank Square, folks.
It's because what they want to do, they'll do. They'll break the law and say it's okay. Remember Nixon? I believe it was Nixon back in the day when he said, if the president does it, it can't be illegal. And the city council has very much the same attitude. If we say we can do it, we can do it, even if the law says we can't.
Right. And now La Berger Park and the Christmas decorations that were moved from the school over to La Berger, likely because the school was uncomfortable with having an illegal off-premise sign advertising for giving credit to the Lindbergh Lions organization. Okay, I'm not sure who put these decorations up. I'm going to guess probably our city parks department crews did that. And I'm not sure who authorized putting the signs up, but it clearly was not authorized by the council ahead of time. They really made a blunder. And
then they just, afterward, they said, okay, well, let's pretend it was always going to be okay.
Whenever the city makes an exception like that and does something like that, you can rest assured, folks, Theresa and I are going to jump on that, because what's good for one is good for another, right? That's called fairness.
Yeah.
So just
Simple
like
justice.
when others were invited to sit in front of us as a sort of a slap in the face to us on June 3rd,
Right.
after that meeting occurred, remember I turned to you and said, oh, that's interesting. Now, since they made that exception for those folks, we can also sit forward in another meeting. Because that's the way it works. That's the way this democracy operates.
Yeah.
That's what civil rights are. That's what equal rights are.
And sometimes, if you are one of the people who has to apply the law, who has to say, yes, you can, no, you can't, you're going to have to tell your friends sometimes, no, you can't do that, not just your enemies.
Right.
And if you're not prepared to do that, you should not be holding office. And some of the people who were doing that in the old days don't hold office anymore. So we'll see how this new council goes forward.
Well, okay, so this is another thing I found last night from the meeting of, it's dated March 30th, 2007, and it's called Public Hearings, Consider PUD, that's Planned Unit Developments, Plats, and Signs for Walmart, okay? So back in 2007, it says that, and Lochner, that's Jerry Lochner, our former Public Works Director, and he was for a while our co-city administrator, Lochner added that part of Walgreens' plan, oh, this is something else, sorry, I didn't mean to start reading about that. That's another topic. This is about the stormwater runoff over in that area of Coburn's and Walgreens. I'll get into that another day because I didn't bring all the information. But to do with that, what I have found is that there's conflicting messages. Lochner saying one thing, and our new Public Works Director, Greg Kimman, has said a totally opposite thing for that same area of our town.
Even though none of the ordinances or regulations have changed.
Well, they are changing stormwater runoff ordinances right about now.
Or in reaction to that,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, I don't know if it's in reaction to that, but they're revising all the ordinances to do with that, because like a lot of the other ordinances, they weren't up to par. They weren't legal. Or they needed revision for some reason or another. Okay, so here's the part I was meaning to read. The final two hearings considered the request from, again, Scenic Signs, Walmart. One was a request for a variance for height of a pylon sign, while the city code allows signs to have a height of 30 feet. Now that's pretty high up, folks.
Yeah.
That's taller than most homes. The request is one for 50 feet. It would be a double-faced sign placed in the northwest corner of the Walmart property so that the drivers on both Highway 27 and 10 could see it. Okay, so here's Walmart asking to put up, to violate our sign ordinance, to get special permission to skirt the law. Basically, that's what they were asking to do. And I imagine they got it, because they do have a big honking sign up there now. I have to check the file. I don't want to draw any conclusions until I go and inspect the file, but I'm going to guess they got what they asked for. It says it was pointed out that the variances for sign height had been given to other businesses in the area. Yes, and which one in particular? The hospital has an on-the-roof sign that says St. Gabriel's Hospital is slated, and that is against our ordinance. At the time, and even now, our sign ordinance says you can't have a roof sign. But they got it, because the hospital lobbied for that and they got it. So there was another exception. There are countless exceptions, and one day I'm going to bring in a whole list of all the different exceptions made for the sign ordinance, just so people can know what I know and how deep this runs, how long our planning and zoning, our historic preservation commission, our city attorney, our city administrator, our public works department, our council, everybody has been working to basically do what they want to do, have it one place, but then not enforce it fairly.
Yeah,
Only enforce it
when it's someone.
selectively.
Selectively.
Okay, so it goes on to say the second request was for a variance of the code which allows a maximum of square footage for signs. Walmart would like to see its signage exceeded by 244 square feet, that the city's code that allows 1,200 square feet per parcel. So they were asking for like over 1,500. And Lochner says, if you allow this, there goes our policy. Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
And then the city's attorney, Tony Wetzel, added, I can see where a low sign could be considered a hardship in this case. It would prevent people from seeing it, but I see no hardship with the amount of signage. I caution you, don't let variances come so often with your ordinances. So here's our city attorney, folks, saying to the council, you're making too many exceptions to your law.
Go ahead and break the rules, just don't do it too often.
Right, that's exactly what she was saying. So I'll have more on that. I'm gonna, like I said, I'm gonna do this deep in-depth thing
Yeah.
coming up, okay? So I'm not the only one who has used signs for part of peaceful protest. Look at these signs, folks. This is my friend David Petrovich, who lives in Oakhurst, New Jersey. And I believe he has a degree from Rutgers University. Okay, this is a man that's got a lot of smarts. What did he do with his signs? One step better than I did. I have a brick house. I couldn't have done this. He mounted his professionally done signs right onto the exterior siding of his home. And he did this some years ago. See? They're attached to his home. Okay? The signs say, stop bombing children in schools. That's, of course, in foreign nations. ALEC, which is American Legislative Exchange Council, a dangerous organization, right-wing organization. ALEC buys votes and writes laws, because that's exactly what they do, folks. They hand bills to our legislators so the legislators don't even have to write their own bills. And they're devised by the corporations to suit the corporations.
They're written by the corporations and just passed off as genuine legislation.
Tax the rich and corporations.
Mhm.
Now, his signs are very similar to what my sign said.
Mhm.
3 trillion for endless wars, 7 trillion for Wall Street boers. Healthcare, not warfare. And I think that one says save the homes, because he's involved heavily in a mortgage foreclosure movement in his area. He and his organization are working really hard to help people from losing their homes, and I think that's something we need to do here locally too.
Yes, we do.
Another sign says, "We the people want a national moratorium on illegal foreclosures." On his bench he has "End the wars and tax the rich." That was right by his house. Here's another one. "Flush the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, a global corporate coup d'etat." No, people in his area didn't like his signs either.
Oh, I'm sure not.
So people complained, and for 2 years, his city's been after him to take his signs down. And I'm going to tell you an update that I got off his Facebook page recently. I'm just going to read this to you. An update, our tone versus our expression of free speech. Now there's a couple words in here. I'm going to have to just use the first letter of the word because I can't swear on this channel, nor do I want to. After 2 years, we received a notice from our town's zoning officer stating our signs were in violation of the town's land use ordinance. This is Oakhurst, New Jersey. We were ordered to remove the signs within 10 days or face a summons to appear in court. We responded in writing and sent copies of the warning notice, demand a response to some of our friends, including Facebook friends, which triggered the birth of our Blog Talk radio program titled Lives in the Balance Sheet. But that's another post. And he's asked me to be on his radio show to talk about how the city has censored my viewpoint. And I think, just a quick thing about that cognitive dissonance, I think the reason why so many here, including council and others, have tried to silence my speech, and yours, is that we represent inclusion, diversity, transparency, and change. We represent change.
Progress.
And people don't want that. People want things just the way that they are.
Yeah.
Like I've said online, the good old white frat boys groups and their wives and the opportunity hoarders want to keep things just the way that they are, and they work with the slumlords and the bar owners' interests and the counselors, the city attorney, the judges, and the police all work together to keep that whole system working keep it just exactly how they want.
Mm-hmm.
So David writes, the signs were not signs per the definition contained within the town's land use ordinance, so stated our daughter, who reviewed both the warning notice and then the town's land use ordinance. That's really all we have to say, she advised. At the moment, maybe later we'll talk about the whole free speech thing and the United States Constitution taking precedence over a hack land use ordinance. Yes, our daughter, the New Jersey licensed attorney who chooses not to practice. Darn shame, and he said, used a different word, but I'll say darn shame. She could really help a lot of people, including herself, but that's another post. A month or so later, we got another warning from the town. Oh boy, I said to myself, like the lyric from Jackson Brown's song, Lives in the Balance. I've been waiting for something to happen. Talk about timing. The New Jersey Civil Liberties Union took an interest in our relationship to the town's land ordinance, and through Rutgers in Law, issued the town's mayor and municipal attorney a substantial critique of land use ordinance and a recommendation its unconstitutional ordinance be brought into compliance, and basically to leave us the H alone. And he used stronger language, but I won't. The letter went on to describe our constitutional right to express political speech in the Constitution taking precedence. I boo-booed there. Let's see. The letter went on to describe our constitutional right to express our political speech in the manner we have, and by the way, they aren't signs, even by your own town's ordinance definition. So Merry Christmas. Thank you to all doing the work many of you do. Many hands make lighter work. all issues connected like spokes on a wheel with a common hub. In time, we activists and majority connect the dots and focus our attention on the common source of the disease our society faces, capitalism. Now we must agree on its replacement, an alternative, and how to implement a new system peacefully. To say we use the United States Constitution in Article 5, the Amendment Clause, like the economic system of slavery before it, let's abolish capitalism legally, peacefully. Let's instead have a system based on the people and planet prior to private ownership and private profit. We need an economic democracy, call it what you will. So David is fighting for the same kind of things that I was fighting for with my science, wanting to educate the passers-by. He did it the same manner, just his signs were a little more professionally done and they were strapped to his house, and he gets nothing but grief from the people at City Hall. Mm-hmm. This is happening all over the nation, folks. I'm finding this out.
What is the ethic that says anybody who is a little different needs to be clubbed? You know, I don't understand that.
Well, think about it. Most of the activists in our society are boomers.
Yeah.
Many of them are disabled or have some physical issues. So what better way to get your message out than put it on your own curtilage, your own property? What really do science harm? And that was the argument that Randall Burkness used recently. And many commentators on Facebook and other online, and he did an article with the Brainerd Dispatch, a big thing in the news up there, and in the Morrison County Record. Really, what do holiday signs hurt? Okay, true. But what did my signs harm? Absolutely nothing.
Nothing, no.
Nothing.
They offended some people's sensibilities, but Christmas signs offend the sensibilities of some people.
Well, in fact, for a couple of years in a row, I used my Christmas signs in conjunction with banner signs.
Yeah.
People didn't like that either, because you know what? They didn't like the content of the message on my signs. That's what it's always been about. Well, too bad.
Yeah.
I have a right to have a differing viewpoint. I intend to use that speech in any way that I can going forward. And I'm just going to point out a couple things. You know, I haven't done a ton of research, but the little bit that I have done, there are issues with sign ordinances all over the country. And Bruce Fine told me towards the end, before we went to our settlement conference, that Ledoux v. Galeo, the landmark case that was set like 20 years ago, has not been revisited since then, and he felt it was time to break it wide open. Mm-hmm. And it is. If we don't have the right to use our own property, to advocate in the highest degree with our free speech, then we're really on a slippery slope losing our rights. Mm-hmm. So this is from the Palm Beach Daily News. Lawsuit, town goes too far on political sign rules and enforcement. A Palm Beach couple says the town's regulations regarding political signs go too far. Leslie Blackner, an environmental attorney, and her husband Richard Stone have filed a federal lawsuit against the town. And this is recently now, folks. This is September of this year, the end of September this year.
2 months ago.
Have filed a federal lawsuit against the town seeking to overturn its political sign regulations. The complaint, filed Thursday in United States District Court, Southern District of Florida, also names defendants Mayor Gail Coniglio, the town council members, and code enforcement officer Rob Walton. So similar to our lawsuit here when I filed. Mm-hmm. We filed against the 2 city code administrators and a number of other individuals. The couple have been harassed and burdened by the aggressive enforcement of the political sign ordinance by the town and its code officials, the lawsuit says. It calls unconstitutional the town ordinance that limits political signs to no more than 4 square feet, which is what our sign ordinance was originally. 4 square feet, that's really tiny, folks. That's 2 feet by 2 feet. That's not a very big sign. Let's see. Unless the property fronts more than one street, in that case, 2 signs, 1 on each street front, are permitted. Okay, so that's Palm Beach, Florida. Here's another case in Wyoming. It's called from the WyomingNews.com. Council to reconsider yard signs ordinance. And this is recent also. It's from December of this year. A previous attempt to amend the city code failed, but a lawsuit has local leaders looking at the law again. Cheyenne, the Wyoming Liberty Group, is challenging the constitutionality of the city's election sign code in court. Attorneys for the local nonprofit, which focuses on constitutional issues, and Government Accountability filed a lawsuit against the city in district court on Thursday. Critics of the current regulations say they unconstitutionally restrict residents' free rights to free speech. We work to promote fixing the problem through conversations with individual council members, Liberty Group attorney Boyd Wiggum said. When that didn't work, we asked the court to explain to the city that there is a constitutional problem with the code. The code that we currently have is probably unconstitutional, and we have to do something to address that. We have the responsibility to correct that defect. So, even Royalton, after my case was settled, I don't know how many dozens, if not hundreds of cities in this state revised their sign ordinance, including Royalton. Royalton had a pretty wide open sign ordinance, but not anymore. They use the same Hopkins ultra restrictive model for theirs as well. Now, let's talk about a little bit here. Last time we mentioned our friend Kathy Kelly, who was a peace activist.
About 19 minutes left, so
Oh,
we're doing great.
Clipping through here.
Yeah,
We're doing a longer show today, an hour show, because we figured we had enough to talk about.
yeah. And we'll see if this works out, we may continue it.
Yeah, our friend that we met and respect, peace activist, but she's also an environmental activist and has stood up for good things all of her life and against things that she considered bad, like nuclear armament and nuclear power. And she's been jailed a number of times. Well, as we told you last time, she was arrested for just stepping over a fine line she and another gal, at the Whiteman Air Force Base, where they train to fly killer drones that are illegally assassinating people in other countries. She brought bread there to break bread with the military people as a peaceful thing to do. And then she also carried a paper which was an indictment for war crimes of killing people illegally. And it was her right to do that, but since she stepped actually on the base property, they quickly arrested her. And I'm going to read just a little bit here. She's been sentenced now to 3 months in prison. And she's, like I said, she's been imprisoned a number of times. And imagine, the military officer that stated that she needs rehabilitation, standing up for what your heart convicts you to believe in according with your faith, that we are not to kill others and we're not to war on others individuals, and somehow these people need rehabilitation like I needed to go to the PERT program.
Yeah.
Because, I haven't learned my lesson yet. Well, the lesson that I have learned is that if people who are convicted about something that they take deep in their heart and in their civic judgment's sake, so to speak, if they don't speak out, who's going to? We're on a crash course with a financial travesty. I don't know that our country can ever dig out of our constant eternal wars, and we're indebted up to hock to other governments, especially China, and we can't afford it. But that's only a small part of it. What we're doing is wrong, folks. And if we don't stop what we're doing, pricking the beehive, so to speak, in the Middle East and all over the world, it's going to end up causing the demise of all of us. That's my firm belief, anyway. So this article is titled "Drones and Discrimination Kick the Habit." June 1st, 2014. Georgia, her friend, and I think it's Georgia Walker, and she were immediately arrested when they stepped on Missouri's Whiteman Air Force Base, where pilots fly weaponized drones over Afghanistan and other countries. They took a loaf of bread and a letter to Brigadier General Glenn D. Van Herk. A group of her Afghan friends, had entrusted her with a simple message, their grievance: please stop killing us. That's the message she took to this Air Force base. The prosecution recommended the maximum 6-month sentence. Miss Kelly needs to be rehabilitated, said an earnest young military lawyer. The judge passed through a 4-page summary of past convictions and agreed that she hadn't yet learned not to break the law. But she's breaking the law to defend others' lives.
what Peter, Paul, and Mary call going to jail for justice. This wonderful song that they have, "Have you been to jail for justice? Then you're a friend of mine," is how the chorus goes. This was written by Kathy Kelly, Lessons Learned in the Buka Camp. In January of 2004, I visited Buka Camp, a U.S.-run POW camp named for a firefighter lost in the 2001 collapse of New York's World Trade Center. Located near the isolated port city of Qasr in southern Iraq, the network of tent prisons had been constructed by U.S. coalition authorities. Friends of 5 young men thought to be imprisoned there had begged our 3-person Voices delegation to try and visit the camp and find out what had happened to their loved ones. This was a year before the capture of Awad Ibrahim Ali al-Badri al-Samarai, who, starting in 2005, would spend 4 years in the camp under the name Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, on his way to becoming the head of the recently founded Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. They were able to find the capture tag numbers for 2 of the prisoners. These 2 people, at least, were still alive and at the camp. Upon leaving, we asked to speak with an officer in charge of the Buka camp. She said, "Be glad they're here with us and not in Baghdad," and gave us a knowing look. I was surprised. At least in Baghdad it wouldn't be so difficult to visit them. She repeated herself, "I'm just telling you, be glad they're not in Baghdad." Later, in May of 2004, I began to understand what she meant. On May 1st, CNN released pictures from the Abu Ghraib prison. The hooded man, the man on a leash, the pyramid. These pictures are now burned into people's minds. Suddenly there were very few places that seemed as horrible as that prison. Yes, we were very glad the young men we visited were not in Baghdad. To be very clear, these men at Buka had been marched naked in front of women soldiers. They'd been told to say, "I love George Bush," before they could receive their food rations. They'd slept on the open ground in punishingly cold weather, with no mat beneath them and only one blanket. The guards had taunted them, and they had had no way of telling their friends they were still alive. But worse humiliation and torture were inflicted on detainees in other U.S. prison centers throughout Iraq. The November 3, 2005 issue of the New York Review of Books quoted 3 officers, 2 of them non-commissioned, stationed with the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division at Forward Operating Base Mercury in Iraq. This is a quote then from that. Speaking on condition of anonymity, they described in multiple interviews with Human Rights Watch how their battalion in 2003 and 2004 routinely used physical and mental torture as a means of intelligence gathering and for stress relief. Detainees in Iraq were consistently referred to as PUCs. Do you know what that means? I don't either. The torture of detainees reportedly was so widespread and accepted that it became a means of stress relief, where soldiers could go to the PUC tent on their off hours to hurt PUCs or smoke a PUC. Hurting a PUC referred to beating a detainee, while smoking a PUC referred to forced physical exertion, sometimes to the point of unconsciousness. Smoking, as that term means, was not limited to stress relief, but was central to the interrogation system employed by the 82nd Airborne Division at FOB, Forward Base Mercury. Officers and NCOs from the Military Intelligence Unit would direct guards to smoke the detainees prior to an interrogation, and would direct that certain detainees were not to receive sleep, water, or food beyond crackers. Directed smoking would last for the 12 to 24-hour period before an interrogation. As one soldier put it, the military intelligence officer said he wanted the PUCs so fatigued, so smoked, so demoralized that they want to cooperate. As one sergeant told Human Rights Watch, if he's a good guy, you know, now he's a bad guy because of the way we treated him.
And that's the way that it works with torture. You know, we have the Geneva Conventions and international law, folks, for a reason. And that is that we have found that if we don't treat our prisoners well, that we incarcerate, when our soldiers are incarcerated by another country's soldiers, they're gonna get beat up, or they're gonna get trashed, they're gonna get tortured. So we don't want to have that done to our soldiers, so we're supposed to not do that to anyone else's as well.
It isn't even a matter of an eye for an eye. It's not just that we don't want our soldiers treated that way. Do we want to be the people who treat anybody that way?
Right. It doesn't speak well for a military or for our country for that kind of stuff to be going on, but we know that the international conventions of war and the Geneva Conventions that absolutely restrict and make illegal torture, those laws were all bent. And now John Yoo, who was one of the lawyers that basically tried to concoct a way around the Geneva Convention laws and say that torture was okay, and a gentleman by the name of Bybee, they're under scrutiny right now. They may be convicted and they may be tried for war crimes. I hope so. Before we go any further, I want to show you a picture of Kathy Kelly. She's one of the most soft-spoken, decent individuals, just a really nice gal. She's just like Theresa and I in the sense of just an average person, and she spent her lifetime going and working on behalf of peace in other countries. She works with Voices for Creative Nonviolence, it's called. Her and Brian Terrell, who was also sent to prison recently for, again, standing up for justice and human rights. She's a really nice woman. She'll come again, and when she does, I hope to host an event and have her speak, and maybe then she'll share with us her prison experience. And we are doing okay. We've got 8 minutes left.
8 minutes and 35 seconds.
I'm going to let Theresa read about this because my voice is going shot. She can tell you about that.
This is interesting. This is a study showing something I've long suspected, that the rich give less to charity than low and middle income people who give more. A new study finds that the nation's most affluent citizens are reducing their charitable contributions, while low and middle income people are donating more. You know, when you feel the pinch, it develops a certain sympathy for others who are feeling the pinch that you may not get otherwise. The study from the Chronicle of Philanthropy looks at charitable giving in 2012 compared with 2006, the year before the start of the Great Recession. Americans who earn less than $100,000 per year contributed 4.5% more of their incomes to charity that year. Meanwhile, those with incomes between $100,000 and $200,000 reduced their giving by 3.3%, and Americans earning more than $200,000 cut back on their donations by 4.5%. Is there more?
There's more.
Okay, there's more. As the Chronicle notes, lower and middle income people gave more despite watching their incomes decline from 2006 to 2012. By contrast, the wealthiest Americans saw their wealth and income soar in the recession's aftermath. The latest study dovetails with previous findings about wealth and charitable giving. A 2012 study by the Chronicle showed that while middle-income citizens gave 7.6% of their incomes to charity on average, the figure was just 2.8% for those earning more than $200,000 a year. The Chronicle study also examined the types of charities different income groups support. Affluent givers are more likely to support hospitals and cultural institutions like museums, while lower-income contributors tend to support social service agencies. Not only have incomes gone down, but the cost of living has gone up. So I was just at the grocery store the other day. I spent $50 and change for a couple of small bags of groceries. It's shocking to me, the cost of living.
I don't know if we're going to get time to get into this time, so maybe we should start with I'll have you read the in-between stuff because this is important stuff in here. And this is again from the 10-point program. These are Veterans for Peace, former military officers and soldiers stating what they'd like to see changed within the military and beyond.
Okay, well, let's start with the first point because I assume these are in order of the things that people feel most strongly about. Point 1, we demand the right to refuse illegal and immoral orders. Service members should no longer be bound to carry out the plans of the Pentagon and Wall Street in violation of the U.S. law, international law, and people's right to self-determination. Service members deserve the right to resist without persecution orders that conflict with internationally recognized laws or that conflict with their own conscience. Second point, we demand an immediate end to the criminal occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan. Service members should no longer be sent to fight, kill, die, be seriously wounded, and or psychologically scarred, furthering the domination of U.S. corporations over other nations. We have nothing to gain from these wars. The occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan serve only the interests of the rich, not the service personnel who are sent over and over to repress people who have the right to determine their own destiny. The people of Iraq and Afghanistan are not our enemies. The more than 800 U.S. bases in 130 countries around the world should be shut down and the troops, fleets, and air power brought home.
Hear, hear.
Number 3, we demand an end to the existing officer corps. The existing class stratification in the military must end. Officers who are overwhelmingly from more privileged sectors of society enjoy a much higher standard of living. They are paid significantly more, are provided much higher quality housing, and have access to services not available to enlisted personnel. Officers advance their careers on the backs of enlisted personnel. Boy, is that true. Going so far as to send their troops into harm's way for the good of their resumes. The existing officer corps should be dismantled and replaced by enlisted service members who are democratically elected by their units and who are subject to recall at any time. Officers should no longer enjoy special privileges, including hand salutes. Wow. We also demand that the right for lower enlisted ranks to unionize and form committees to address grievances with the chain of command, the unit, and the military. Number 4, we demand an end to racism, sexism, and homophobia prevalent in the media.
Just something quick in here. Theresa and I are sort of a counter to Major Donovan and Colonel St. Zoller. Our program sort of counters them. You know, in many ways it's kind of opposite. But it's good for people to hear and see both sides.
Well, yeah, and that there is a document stating opposition to some of the things that have always been sacrosanct, like the salute.
And these are written by people who've been in the military. And they know it full blast ahead. They know exactly what they're talking about.
You know,
because they lived it.
Yeah. I've always said, and I know Robin would agree with me, that I'm not anti-soldier, but I am anti-military. Because the military exploits the soldiers terribly and then asks the public to contribute funds to take care of them after they're damaged or shattered. You know, my mother contributed for years to disabled veterans organizations. The military should be taking care of the people that they break and ruin. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't be the responsibility of private citizens. Not that I say we shouldn't donate. If the military is not going to, yes, we should do what we can, but that's beside the point. You know, we've got just a couple of minutes left. I think maybe we might have to leave it here.
We'll maybe go through a couple more and
okay.
We'll finish up what we don't get to the next time. And just to give you a little teaser for next time, I found this article and it's titled "The Pentagon is Preparing for Societal Collapse Due to Climate Change." And
yes.
NSA PRISM is motivated in part by fears that environmental linked disasters could spur anti-government activism. So we're going to be talking about that first next time, folks. But
that'll be interesting.
Go ahead, Theresa.
Okay, I'm just going to do this point 4 about anti-racism, sexism, and homophobia. These are intentional barriers to rank and file unity against the will of the Pentagon. Interesting, huh? And must be eliminated through comprehensive education and strict disciplinary action. With the welcomed repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, we demand that necessary measures be taken to ensure that the new law is being respected and that the rights and well-being of LGBT troops are not infringed on in any way. It's almost as if the military is its own little nation.
They are.
They've got their own ethos and their own laws.
Yeah.
We demand, this is number 5, we demand adequate funding for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Veterans should have full access to quality health care. Services should be drastically expanded to meet the real physical and mental health needs of veterans and their families. Boy, is that true. Independent medical investigation should be initiated to research the effects of potentially harmful experimental drugs and chemical, biological, and nuclear agents to which service members have been exposed. Any service member who has served in a combat theater should automatically receive lifetime compensation from the VA for being forced to suffer or inflict physical and or psychological harm in advancing the interests of U.S. corporations. I'd like to stop there. Let's do this next time too. Let's
we'll start on, we left off with number
Number 5.
Number 5, so we're halfway through it. We'll finish up with that next time, and
Great.
thank you for watching again.
Thank you so much. And if you're enjoying these production values, thank Chris, the new guy at Channel 181.
He's doing an excellent
He
job.
really is, and he's been so helpful and so informative to us. So thank you very much. We'll see you next time on Can We Talk?
Happy New Year.